Hi Wildcats, I'm Natalie Sheffield and this is...
Mr. Lance.
This is How to Hobby. We're going to talk about his hobby, which is...
Dungeons and Dragons.
Alrighty, can you get into a little bit about what Dungeons and Dragons is for someone who knows nothing about it?
Sure, so it is the greatest game in the history of the universe. That's the first thing you need to know. 2, it is a RPG, it's a role-playing game. So you get into a particular character and then you use a dice, this is called a D20, and you roll it and it changes the outcomes of the game. And so kind of think about a campfire story, like if you're telling ghost stories around a fire, but then there is fate that comes in and completely change the whole point of that story.
All right, so for the most epic game of all time, how did you get into this game?
So I started off a long time ago when I was in Boy Scouts. And we actually probably every time we went camping, we'd go out and we'd either play Magic, or it's just a card game, or Dungeons and Dragons, and we'd sit around for hours. Like we would probably play from maybe like 8 or 9 o'clock at night when it was dark, all the way until like 2 or 3 in the morning. Every single night. It was awesome around the campfire. We had so much fun, especially with just the ambiance of being in a dark forest at night and wind through the trees and whatever else. And I fell in love with it. And then when I got into high school, I was just like, no, that's like a little kid's game. I don't care. I'm too cool. YOLO. And then after I found out who I was as a human, which is a nerd, in college, I got back into it. And me and actually some of my friends in college, we did some D&D during college, and it just kind of went from there. And I've been dungeon mastering, which is DMing, that's kind of like the head of the game, or playing for years, decades now, because I am old and fat. Yes.
Not that old. It's a cool game.
It's a fun game, and you get to play with toys, kids. Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about what the structure of one of these games would look like?
Yeah, so it's a narrative story. So there's someone called the Dungeon Master, like I just said, and they start telling a grand tale. And then you can have as many players as you want. I wouldn't recommend over maybe 5 to 8 maximum. You can do more than that, but after that it gets a little tedious. And you tell a story, and then anybody can come in and ask if they could do something. And then they roll a dice, and that will determine whether or not you can do that action. It can be something as simple as investigating an area and doing a check on that. Or it could be something crazy, like you want to cartwheel up a tree, and then you want to draw your bow and arrow, and it has to catch on fire, and you have to fling the arrow just right to stop a little goblin going along or whatever. And if you roll high enough, like a D20, then that means it's 100% it gets done, and you just cartwheeled up a tree, which is physically impossible.
Yeah, that sounds exactly like our D&D games.
Yep.
All right. Can you tell me, we have a bunch of stuff here. Can you tell me a little bit about what each item is and how it's used?
Yeah, so we got a lot of cool things here. First off, this is probably my most important thing in the whole universe. This is where I have all of my notes for different adventures, different dungeons. I drew out a little rudimentary dungeon where the people are going, so I can describe it to them, and they can go back to rooms, what loot is in what area, what bad guys are in each area. So this is basically how I have all of my stats. So you can, as a DM, you can have your own, you have your own monsters, and they have their own stats on the back. And what's easier for me is I write down the stats here, so that way the adventurers, if they do walk into a room and I'm like, do you want to crack the door open, or do you just want to kick the door down? So this is basically all of my storytelling, all of my story snippets, the different beats of the story. But the story can go off on crazy tangents depending on the players. So I might say that there's this really awesome glowing castle, and you feel this crazy presence of darkness as you see all the mist slowly coming through the trees. And one of the players goes, I want to go to the nearby town. I'm looking for floss. And we just completely miss the giant awesome castle, and we go to town in search of floss. And that usually takes 2 hours. Anyway, so that is my my adventures.
Is that specifically for DMs, or is it also for players?
I would recommend for both. So this is just a normal journal, but I put all of my adventures in it so I can go back and kind of reminisce over it. I'm like, oh, that was hilarious, But if you're a player, writing down all of the stuff that you get in your adventure, if you get a magical sword, or if you get more gold, or whatever happens, you get a bag of holding that you can put anything into, whatever it is, write it down in here, or you can put put it down in your player sheet. It's just really fun to go back and look at all of your items and things that you've got. So that's the first thing. Number 2, this is for Dungeon Masters only. This is our guide. This is kind of the framework on how to run an adventure, how different areas work, how monsters work. You have in here a really, let's see here if I can pull it up. You've got all of your epic weapons, right, that you can find on the adventures, and it has all of the stats and how they work and magical abilities and stuff like that. So that's for Dungeon Masters. That kind of gives little either Easter eggs or fun moments to the players. Now, the one cool thing about Dungeons and Dragons is you can create anything you want to. These are suggestions. The person that created Dungeons and Dragons, Gary Gygax, may he rest in peace, was a great and amazing man, and he said that this is just all suggestions. If you are role-playing, you're in the moment, you're rolling dice, you're creating awesome characters, and you're fighting dragons or going on crazy adventures, that's Dungeons and Dragons. So you can homebrew or create your own monsters, create your own weapons. You don't have to just stick to one of these things, because these books are expensive. This one is $50, but you do not have to do that. You can just go and create your own stuff if you so desire, and that's called homebrewing. The next thing is the player's handbook that has basically all the different players that you can have. Kind of as a jump point off of that is you don't have to have minis, which are little versions of your character, little avatars. We have a tiefling here, dragonborn. We have a drow or dark elf. And then we have bad guys as well. So, and there's different things you can have to help make the world more real. Right? D&D is theater of the mind. So you're all like in a shared, almost like dream experience as you are talking about this story and what's happening. But it's always cool to have little extra things to help kind of add the realism to the different situations. And then, of course, I just have a huge thing full of dice. I hope this doesn't tip. I did it. And you always need tons of dice. A lot of people ask, there's all sorts of different types of dice. What are the different dice for? Why are there different shapes? What is going on? Are you summoning the powers of darkness? You're not. Each of these are just different weapons, typically. Your D20 is your main dice. That informs all of your decisions going forward. But then there's other dice, and they kind of, this might be a crossbow, this might be a broadsword, so on and so forth. So you have your weapons dice. So anytime I'm playing the game, I'll have my decision dice, and I'll have my weapons dice, or maybe I have 2 weapons, and there are my 2 weapons, and that's what I play with typically. And as the game goes on, if you sell weapons and buy new weapons, then you get different dice to just say what you roll, if that makes sense.
Can I ask a little bit more about the dice? There seems to be a bunch of different kinds. Is there like a set of dice? Is there like how many different types of dice are there?
So the standard is 7 that you get. Now there is also a D100. Most of those are for maybe wild magic or really high level spells. But typically if you just buy your just normal Violet dice, you're looking at 7.
All right. That's really cool. If someone wanted to get like into D&D and wanted to start playing this, how would you recommend they do that?
Go out there and find. There are lots of different groups. I do know that the Silver Springs Public Library, every single month, they have a Dungeons and Dragons group that meets at the library, which is pretty cool. Also, there is a store in Greenville called Brigandry Games, and they are all about D&D, but they also have Warhammer 40K. They have Magic. They got a bunch of different nerd stuff, and you can always go there, and they host games and tournaments all the time, so you can go in and learn. Also, just ask around on Facebook. There are hundreds of different groups of Dungeons and Dragons people in the area that are starting groups, and you can just jump in and have fun.
Alrighty. Well, would you recommend this game? Would you recommend people get into it?
Out of 10, this is a solid 100 trillion. Okay, so just it is the greatest thing, and it has changed my whole life and my perception of reality. Like literally, if I fail, like if I just trip and land on my face, I rolled a 1. If I do something really cool, I say to myself that I rolled a 20. Like it has literally changed how I do things in my life. And even in class, and my students will know, sometimes I use the dice on whether or not we take tests or we do certain things, and it's all based on fate. So
I can definitely confirm that one. Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for talking about the best game ever. Thank you for watching. If you want to talk about your cool hobby, you can come down to room 501, talk to Mr. Lance, myself, or our wonderful camera woman, Kaylee Ortwig. I've been Natalie Sheffield. This has been
Mr. Lance.
Alright, that's all we have for this one. Make sure to like and subscribe, and on to the next one, Wildcats.